I had started some videos ago working on the book of Ecclesiastes, seeking to track the thought of this great book, the Kohelet. We saw, first of all, in the prologue of chapter 1, verse 1 down to verse 11, where everything basically is constantly, passing off the scene, new things are happening. And we talked about the theme, Hevo Havalim, vanity of vanities, Hevo Havalim Hakol Havo. Everything is fleeting. Everything is transitory. This is what he's saying. And we talked about how he illustrates that by generations coming and going, by the cycles of the wind, by all things toiling to weariness, and there's nothing new under the sun. It just keeps repeating itself. So how do we find reality in the midst of that? The Kohelet, first of all, tried wisdom. And he talks about the vanity of human wisdom. Why? Because in much knowledge is sorrow. Because he says you basically have things that are crooked, but you can't make them straight. You have things that are lacking, but you can't get the sum. You're trying to get 10, you have 7, but you can't get 3 to get 10. So in light of that, he talks about how much wisdom brings much vexation, and one who increases knowledge increases sorrow. And I think we had concluded that section by seeking to make comparison with the New Testament and how Christ is the answer to real wisdom. We are told that the treasures of wisdom are hidden in him in Colossians chapter 1. Now we went from there to chapter 2, where the Kohelet talks about the vanity of worldly pleasure. He tried mirth, he tried pleasure, he pampered himself along by having anything he wanted. Not just one house, but many homes and gardens and servants and everything, treasure, money. And so he was great, he said, and I was increased above all that were before me in Jerusalem. Indeed, I even kept my wisdom. But when I looked upon all that I had done, it was all vanity and a chasing after the wind. So now he comes to talk about wisdom and folly. In verses 12 to 17, wisdom is better than folly. And notice his argument is when I turn to see the two, wisdom excels folly as far as light excels darkness. Why? Because a wise man, in his eyes, he can see where a fool walks in darkness and doesn't know it. So he talks about basically how the fool doesn't have understanding, the wise man does, but there's still a problem, and that is both have to die. One event happens to both. Notice in verse 15, he said, as it happened to the fool, so it happens to me. And there's one event, he's speaking of death, so why was I more wiser? In other words, this also is vanity. So he said, in light of that, I hated life, because the work that is wrought or done under the sun was grievous to me. And it's all like chasing the wind. He then talks about the futility of toil in verses 18 to 23. Notice he said, I hated all the labor when I had labored under the sun. Why? Because I may leave it to someone that might destroy it, that might blow it completely. And who knows whether that one I leave it to will be a wise man or a fool, the Kohelet says. Yet he will have rule over everything that I have labored for. Therefore, since there's this uncertainty, this also is hevel or havel, is vanity, he says in verse 19. He says, so I turned about to cause my heart to despair concerning all the labor wherein I had worked and labored under the sun, and how I see how a man might have wisdom and knowledge and skill, and yet leave it to someone who hasn't labored in it, who destroys it all. So this also is vanity. For what has a man in all of his labor, wherein he works hard under the sun, all his days, he says, verse 23, are filled with pain and with sorrow. And basically, in the end, there's a lot of pain, a lot of sorrow in the process of doing this hard labor. So he said, this also seems to be vain. I've thought about the New Testament in relationship to this, where Christ says, or the New Testament says, they who toil for him, your labor is not in vain in the Lord, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, at the end of 15. But Jesus said, labor not for that which is perishing, but for that which will last. Speaking, I believe, of laboring for his kingdom and serving him. So then, having tried in chapter 2 all of the things that the Kohelet tried, worldly pleasure, the whole idea of contrasting wisdom and folly, but knowing that even with his wisdom, death is the inevitable end of life. And then the toil, the futility of it, because he toils all through life and then leaves it to someone that might destroy it, perhaps. And then he realizes, in light of all of this, that there is nothing better than to enjoy life. So he'll come back to this theme a lot of enjoying life. Notice verse 24. There is nothing better then for a man that he should eat and drink and make his soul enjoy pleasure in his labor. This I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. For who will eat or who will enjoy, if not I? For to the man that God has given good in the sight, for the man that is good in his sight, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, he gives the task together to heap up, that he may leave to him that which is good in the sight of God. This also is vanity and is striving after the wind. I think what he's saying, in light of life and in light of all the vanity of what one is going through, enjoy life. Smell the roses. Enjoy life while you have it. It doesn't mean that he's simply taking a pure Epicurean approach. That is, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. I don't think he's taking that, but I think what he's saying is you need to enjoy life. You need to eat and drink and make your soul to enjoy the pleasure for or in toil. And so I think the thought is there's nothing wrong with toil and work, but you must enjoy life in the process. One of the things that we are seeing today is that life often is not enjoyed. People are workaholics at times. They work, and a lot of times they have no choice. But somehow in the midst of that, there needs to be a choice to enjoy life. And Jesus talked about giving life abundantly. And I think as we look at the New Testament, Jesus certainly enjoyed nature. He talked about the birds, he talked about the flowers of the field. And so when you really think about it, the Lord, he went to a wedding and celebrated. He enjoyed life in the midst of his toil and the 3.5 years of his earthly ministry, looking toward the cross. And so as I look at this, I think one of the things that the Kohelet is saying, in light of all that I've been talking about, enjoy life. And that is one of the things that we need to see from the Kohelet. It is a theme that reiterates over and over. And that is, smell the roses as you go through life.